Before we get into today's episode, I just want to quickly ask that you subscribe and like if you enjoy my content. It really helps the channel out and it motivates me to make more content. Now back to your regularly scheduled programming. Publius Cornelius Scipio Africanus is one of the most popular and well-known Romans of the pre-Caesarian eras. His battlefield prowess and victories over Carthage were legendary, to the point that even centuries after his victories, Romans still viewed Scipio as a model to look up to. But how did this legend's name become so synonymous with victory? How is it that we remember his name today, some 2,000 years after his death? Today, those are the questions we will attempt to answer. Welcome to the first episode examining an individual Roman in the Romans series on this channel. In this series, we will examine some of the most famous Romans in history and examine just what made Rome such a superpower and how the Roman legacy still lives on. Publius Cornelius Scipio was born into the Cornelia gens in about 236 BCE. A gens is essentially a family that are all united in descent from one common ancestor. The Cornelia gens was one of the most influential and greatest of the patrician families of Rome. In fact, the gens was considered to be among the 6 major families of Rome, along with the families of Manila, Fabia, Emilia, Claudia, and Valeria. Members of the Cornelia family had served in high political positions since the founding of the Roman Republic, and Scipio's father, grandfather, and great-grandfather had all served as consuls, which at this point was essentially equal to serving as kings. It certainly seemed then that Scipio was destined for great things. Not much is known about Scipio's early life, but we can safely assume that he was raised in comfort, along with being finely educated. The history surrounding Scipio's life resumes right at the start of the Second Punic War. His father, Publius Cornelius Scipio, yes, they had the same name, it was like an early version of senior and junior, was serving as consul. This meant that he was expected to lead the Roman troops in battle and the war against Carthage. Scipio was at this point old enough to join the military, and thus followed his father into war. Scipio would fight in the Battle of Cannae, one of the most important battles in early Roman history, and certainly deserving of its own video, and would be one of the few high-ranking members of Roman society to survive the battle. Afterwards, he would take command of the roughly 10,000 survivors. This was really the beginning of his legend. Afterwards, Scipio would be a candidate for the office of aedile, which was the first step on the cursus honorum. This was despite the fact that Scipio had not yet reached the age required for the office. However, he was elected unanimously, and any who had some reservations were forced to look the other way. Scipio's life then resumes with the war in Spain, or Hispania as the Romans called it. Scipio's father and uncle were both killed in Spain at the Battle of the Upper Baetis. His father died during the Battle of Casullo, while his uncle died at the Battle of Illorca, which were the 2 constituent parts of the Battle of the Upper Baetis. Both of the attacking armies were led by the brother of Hannibal, Hasdrubal Barca. Because of this, Rome lost the 2 commanders it had in Hispania and resolved to send a new army under a new proconsul to hold the region. Scipio Africanus was the only person to volunteer for the position. Every other possible candidate refused, believing it to be a death sentence. For Scipio, however, the issue was personal. His father and uncle had just died, and Scipio wanted revenge. So in spite of his significantly too young of age, 25, he was unanimously elected. When Scipio arrived in late 211 BCE, the Carthaginians held all the land south of the Ebro River. Scipio arrived with a force of roughly 1,000 cavalry and 10,000 infantry, along with a burning desire for victory and revenge. Scipio quickly established a base of operations at the Roman city of Tarraco, modern-day Tarragona. While there, he inspected and took over the command of the soldiers that remained from the previous armies. After the winter of 209 BCE, Scipio and his Romans met with the Roman-Spanish allies at the mouth of the Ebro River. All in all, he held command of roughly 27,000 infantry and 5,500 cavalry. Scipio instantly set his sights on the city of New Carthage, which is modern-day Cartagena. Scipio knew that this city was the primary base for the whole Carthaginian operation in Hispania. Conquering it would put the entire Carthaginian military in Hispania at risk and solidify Rome's hold on the peninsula. Scipio was lucky, as the Carthaginian army in Hispania was split into 3 sections, each under the command of a different general. Scipio knew that one of the armies, the one led by Hasdrubal Barca, was about 10 days away from New Carthage, while the other 2 armies were both somewhere in Portugal. This just compounded with the fact that Carthage appeared to not expect any sort of attack on the city, as they had left a relatively light garrison of only 1,000 men to hold the city. This was the perfect time to strike. Scipio was not one to let an opportunity like that go to waste, and thus set out to attack New Carthage immediately. Both Scipio's army and navy would converge on New Carthage in late January of 209 BCE. The Romans, using their fantastic skills at battlefield engineering, quickly set up a rampart to protect their rear before advancing on the city. The defenders inside of New Carthage attempted a sortie in an attempt to get the jump on the Romans. However, it was easily repelled, and the defenders retreated en masse back to New Carthage. This retreat demoralized and spread a panic among the entire defending force, and that force quickly began to abandon their post. Scipio took advantage of this momentary panic and ordered the legionnaires to quickly assault the city walls using ladders, while at the same time his navy began to conduct amphibious landings from the harbor. Unfortunately for Scipio, the Carthaginians quickly collected themselves and began to fight back. However, some legionnaires had already made it over the walls. This isn't to say that the Romans faced no more problems. In fact, much of their ladders were actually too short to even reach over the wall. However, Scipio had done his homework, and knew that at low tide the lagoon on the northern part of the city was fordable. And so, Scipio personally led a detachment of 500 men through the lagoon and over the walls that the Carthaginians had left undefended, due to their confidence in the natural defenses. Scipio led an attack on the rear of the Carthaginians, defending the main gate, and the defenders quickly realized they could do nothing but surrender. And with this, Scipio had won his first victory in Hispania. However, the true victory for Scipio proved not to be the capture of the city, but instead the capture of military equipment and of hostages. On the military side, Scipio had just gained himself 300 brand new siege machines, along with an uncountable number of swords and other such military equipment. It was in his dealings with the hostages and prisoners that we see the true genius of Scipio begin to peek through. He allowed those who he had captured that were citizens of New Carthage the chance to go free and retain their possessions. However, much more importantly, Scipio had gained several hostages from the native Spanish tribes. Scipio treated these hostages extremely well, ensuring that every need of theirs was attended to. Scipio did this with the hope of gaining respect and favor among the hostages' native tribes. Eventually, he even allowed these men to return home, but not before buttering them up and ensuring that when they thought or talked about himself, that they only had good things to say. This seems a perfect time to talk a little bit about the native Spanish tribes. There were really three main groupings. The first were the Iberians. These people were the ancient inhabitants of Hispania, and had been in the region since at least the 6th century BCE, some 400 to 500 years before. These people were extremely, and I mean extremely, good fighters. Their deep knowledge of the land, along with their ritualistic belief in fighting, meant that they made excellent guerrilla fighters and guides for both the Romans and the Carthaginians. The next were the Celts. The Celts had come into Spain in roughly the 4th century BCE, and anyone who knows anything about the Celts knows they were excellent warriors. The Spanish Celts were no different, and their fighting skills were prized among the Romans and the Carthaginians. And the last were the Celtiberians. These people represented a fusion group between the Iberians and the Celts, and thus were likely the best of both worlds in the eyes of Scipio. In any case, tribes from all three were going to be required in order for Rome to be victorious in the war, and Scipio knew this. After his victory at New Carthage, Scipio withdrew back to Terrico to regroup and rest throughout the winter. Through his political intrigue, Scipio was able to turn several tribes to his side and raise a significant number of men from the local populations. Scipio wanted to engage each Carthaginian army separately, as he knew that together he would struggle. Luckily for him, each Carthaginian commander also wanted to fight Rome before the three armies could join together. The Carthaginian commanders knew that if they alone could defeat Scipio and regain the city of New Carthage, they would be celebrated as heroes and lavished in praise and honors back in Carthage. This would quickly prove to be a terrible mistake. Scipio found his next conflict at the Bakula River, where Scipio came upon a force of Carthaginian cavalry who were acting as forward guards for the main camp. Scipio quickly attacked the force, and they, in turn, quickly broke. Scipio pursued them all the way to the main camp, where he stopped and proceeded to set up camp. How badass is that? Imagine you were Hasdrubal, and you had just sent a force of your cavalry out to guard your main army, when suddenly they come riding back towards you in full retreat with the Romans right on their heels. However, instead of the Roman army attacking the main force, they simply stopped and proceeded to set up camp right in front of you. A real-life version of, well, what the hell are you going to do about it? Anyways, I digress. The next bit of action would come in the morning. Hasdrubal had moved his troops back to the top of a hill where two plateaus set. His position was extremely defendable, and it seemed near unassailable. In this moment, Scipio turned to his men and commented that the Carthaginians relied not on courage to win a battle, but on geography. And, he reminded them, the walls of New Carthage were much higher. This whipped his troops into a frenzy, and Scipio gave the command to attack. At first, the Carthaginians were able to hold fairly well, as they rained missiles at the advancing Romans. However, the Romans were undeterred, and eventually reached the flat plains of the plateau, and at that point, it was over. The first plateau had been taken. However, Scipio and the Romans had little time to celebrate, as they still needed to attack and take the higher second plateau. To accomplish this, Scipio split his army into two sections. The first, under his second command, Gaius Laenus, would go to the right side of the hill, and the second, under Scipio's command, would go to the left. Eventually these two forces found their way up to the top of the second plateau, and each attacked a different flank. This pincer movement would quickly work, and the Carthaginians were thrown into disarray. They would lose some 8,000 men, while another 12,000 were taken captive by the Romans. This seems like a good moment to interject and quickly discuss the history behind some of these numbers that we will be discussing over the coming wars and battles. History is written by the victor, and in this case, that victor seems to have taken quite a few liberties. Roman historians of the Punic Wars, such as Livy and Polybus, are notorious for inflating numbers and decreasing casualties, in order to make the Roman victories all the more impressive. In fact, we don't even know how many men the Romans lost at this battle, so we should really look at some of these numbers with a bit of skepticism, as they are likely inflated in order to make the Roman victory all the more impressive. But the fact remains that the Romans had won the day. However, Hasdrubal himself had managed to flee north, towards the Pyrenees, and so Scipio was not able to extract his revenge upon the man just yet. Scipio yet again demonstrated his political acumen after the battle. He rewarded those tribes who had turned to the Romans with plenty of spoils, including horses and gold, and released several prisoners, including a Nubian related to the famous prince Massinissa. The goodwill from these prisoners would eventually come to greatly aid Scipio long after the campaign in Hispania. After the crushing defeat, the commanders of the Carthaginian forces remaining in Spain all met together to discuss their options. Hasdrubal had lost essentially all of his troops, while nearly every Spanish tribe within the Carthaginian army was wavering between loyalty to Carthage or loyalty to Rome. The commanders decided that the best course of action was to remove their remaining troops from Spain and focus on other theaters of war. The command of every troop would be transferred to Hasdrubal, who would march for Italy to help his older brother Hannibal, while the other commanders would attempt to recruit more mercenaries from other areas of Spain. The final battle for Scipio in Spain would be the Battle of Aleppo in southern Spain. In this battle, Scipio had his men attack at daybreak. The first attack was a screen for the true attack, and Scipio only committed his cavalry and a small portion of his infantry. Scipio had his legionnaires move to the wings of the battle, while his Spanish troops set themselves up in the center. Scipio knew that the Carthaginian forces would tire quickly, as they had not had breakfast, and had been standing in the blazing hot Spanish sun for hours now, and so his lines advanced very slowly. Eventually the line broke, and the Romans chased the army all the way back to their camp. Sadly for Scipio, a thunderstorm chose this moment to show up and stop the Roman advance into the camp. This did give the Carthaginians a chance to run and set up a new and much more defensible camp. However, it was all for naught, and by the end of the next day, Hasdrubal Gisco, along with Mago Barca, had both fled the battle for Cadiz, which was still under Carthaginian control. while the remaining members of the army were forced to hide in the surrounding countryside or face capture. And it was with this retreat that Spain was lost, and so Scipio had done it. He had taken the job that no other Roman wanted, and had completely and utterly defeated Carthage in Spain. And along the way, he had avenged his father and uncle, and set the foundations for his eventual legendary reputation. However, Scipio's story did not end here. Please, join me next time when we discuss the campaign which gave Scipio his famous name, Africanus. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you learned something. If you have any comments on the video, or believe I've made a mistake, please comment down below, and please like and subscribe if you enjoyed. It really helps the channel out. Peace.